We've been dealing with a year of uncertainty. At this point, as we get more and more vaccines available, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but the uncertainty remains. What about the new variants? Will we ever be over with COVID? Will schools open? Will they be able to stay open?
The lessons that we can learn from this year of uncertainty can help us in dealing with all of our lives, because uncertainty is the one thing that's certain. This podcast was originally recorded in the beginning of the pandemic, but the conversation around uncertainty remains relevant today.
I'm Neelam, a family and lifestyle medicine physician based in LA.
And I'm Susanna, yoga teacher, author of Honor Yoga's Roots, and activist based in Orlando, Florida.
And welcome to Radical Resilience.
How to live well in a sick world.
We're in the middle of a global pandemic, facing unprecedented changes in our entire way of life, including our health, our jobs, our home, our work, our connections, and how we relate.
So we want to start off talking with you about some of our own experiences in the time of COVID that you might relate to, and then connect those things to broader systems of power and potentials for healing.
We're going to start off with a personal story, get broader from there, and address solutions along the way.
So, this has been one of the hardest experiences of my life. And I'm sure that for folks listening, you can relate. From the moment that I started to realize that I couldn't go out, couldn't meet, I run in-person classes. And I was sitting there kind of weighing the choices, like, do we still meet in person? And so for me, there's just been so much uncertainty, like what are the right choices to make? How do I do things like go shopping? Do I wear a mask? Do I not wear a mask? What's going to happen to our jobs in our own personal household, right? How are we going to make a living with the economy almost ground to a halt? Also on the level of like, what is my child going to remember of his first grade year? What are our children going to think of this time in their lives? And how are they going to grow and cope and evolve and respond with being in isolation and trying to learn in a totally new way? So there's been so much uncertainty. And what I noticed for myself is it comes in waves. There are days where I'm like, I'm good, Susanna, I got this, I'm going to be there and show up. And it's often on the days where I'm showing up for my community online or in some way teaching or guiding that I feel better. So I have noticed that theme and that trend that for me, one way to help deal with the uncertainty is to be of service or to be useful and to be present with other people. But then there are days where I'm just like completely, or even hours, sometimes it cycles in a series of hours, but completely confused, lost, like stressed out, anxious, freaking out. So the best that I can do is open up and not push it away when those feelings come up, notice them, be there with them, try not to snap at my partner and my child or my dog that I'm, isolating with, and just feel them, cry when I need to cry, and then move my body. It's really been a roller coaster, like I'm sure it's been for so many.
For me, as a physician, so much of the uncertainty has been around my role, like what I'm going to be doing. I'm not in the hospital. I'm in an outpatient setting. I'm a family physician doing outpatient primary care. So a lot of what I'm doing is over the phone now and over video visits and talking to people about anxiety that they're experiencing right now and the fear that that's coming up for them, how it manifests in their bodies, and also some real concerns about cough and fever and how to get tested and all of those things, when to go to the emergency room, like what can they be doing to increase their immune system. And so some of it is just like what you're saying, being of service actually feels better in this moment. And then it's also just the uncertainty of not knowing, when am I going to be transitioned into more of a role taking care of people positive with COVID? If we go into a surge, how does that manifest in my own life? What does that mean for my family? And fortunately, I'm in like a really amazing healthcare system that is prioritizing doctors' needs and really communicating and planning and prepping to alleviate some of that anxiety. But it's real. It's so much uncertainty and in such a way that we've never experienced. We've just never, ever had to experience this level of uncertainty, especially here in the US, and especially if you're middle class, right? So that level of uncertainty is raced and classed. My first question that I'm thinking about is like, how does this live in your body? Like, what is it that you feel? Like, how does it manifest in you when you're feeling the uncertainty? What does that look like?
Yes, and you'd think as a yoga teacher and a yoga practitioner, I'd be so good at identifying feelings in my body. But I think that's one of the tools we can all use right now, is just noticing, where is this feeling alive? And it's not actually the first question or the first thing that pops into my mind. It's something I've had to learn to ask myself. So for me, it's in my shoulders, it's in my neck. I feel a constriction in my chest. Even actually, I've had like tightness in the throat, which is so confusing because it mirrors and kind of mimics some of the symptoms that we're all hoping not to have. And I know that for a lot of folks listening, you may be experiencing some of these things too, or different sensations in the body. And when I notice those sensations, one of the things I can bring in from my practice is just bringing awareness there, like to my shoulders, even right now to my chest. There, with the awareness comes a kind of acceptance. And it's when I'm in resistance to what is unfolding, which, so much of uncertainty from a philosophical and a yogic perspective, so much of suffering actually comes from being in resistance to what is. And so when we can just surrender to the situation as it is now, and I'll be real, right? Just because I can say this doesn't mean I can do it. Certainly not all the time. But when we can surrender to the situation as it is, we no longer have to suffer, even though we may be feeling pain or discomfort or maybe experiencing a lot of difficulty on many levels. And so just a concrete example of that is like every time my son gets on his distance learning program, it's so sweet and it's so great, and he's so happy to see his teachers. But for me, it's bittersweet because I'm holding on to what I think his first grade year should be. And he's not. He's, there. He's like, oh, this person. Oh, and I get to see her in her pajamas and her dog, and things he would never get to see normally in a regular school year. My mind is in the past. His is just right there in the present. And so I have like little tears of bittersweet tears of gratitude for it's complicated. It's like gratitude, sadness, regret, resistance though, to what is. And what is now his school is online. Probably the rest of his year will be online. Who knows? Maybe next year too. We just don't know. And that's the thing. My mind goes to the past and it goes to the future. And that's where I get freaked out and where why uncertainty is so hard to hold. For as long as people have been meditating, our minds have done this. They've run to the past and they've run to the future. But the freedom that we're always talking about in a yoga practice or a meditation practice is only available in the present moment. And so for me, it's that recognition of the story of being in the past or in the future, and then saying, oh, right, we're here at the story again, really gently and lovingly, and then bringing myself back.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. Part of what we share is a Buddhist practice around meditation. So much of that practice is about recognizing that everything is uncertain. And, we have these moments where the veil is lifted and we can actually see reality as it is. And reality as it is actually very uncertain. Like we're never sure that when we leave the house, we're going to come home again. But we often don't have to think about that or grapple with that. And we don't want to, because that's a very, very scary situation to always be in that understanding. But if we can make friends with that uncertainty on some level, we'll have an easier time not grasping at the certainty, right? Because the certainty isn't real. And so this moment is one of those moments. Granted, it is a very difficult moment to be practicing in this way of saying, okay, I guess the rug has been pulled out from under us collectively worldwide. And now we can see reality as it is, which has always been uncertain. And we get to make friends with that or deal with that or figure out how we can grapple with that together. And so I wonder what kinds of ways you've been able to grapple with that in your family, in your community. What are some of the things that you're doing that kind of help you deal and stay present with that level of uncertainty and all the emotions that it brings up for you?
Yes. And the very first thing I want to share is that I actually been reflecting on how we're in this really unique time that had this happened 5 years ago, even definitely 10 years ago, we wouldn't have been seeing commentary like this. It's like, if you're not, in isolation, organizing your closet, doing that new project, writing your next book, you didn't have a capacity problem. You weren't too busy. You just weren't disciplined. Like, we're not seeing that. We're seeing people say, don't worry, take care of yourself, take some time off, let yourself grieve, right? There's like a collective awareness. There's a collective gentleness coming from the bottom up. I
Mm-hmm.
don't so much feel that gentleness coming from most of our world leaders, certainly not our leaders in the United States, but there is this different and like tender approach that I think has emerged as we're collectively struggling with how to face this uncertainty that unites all of us. I mean, that's the thing, right? Like, I'm a yoga teacher. I talk about how interconnected we are. And as activists, you and I have spent much of our life working on trying to act from our interconnectedness and shift things so that folks have more equity. But this is the very first time that I think, including myself, like, we're really waking up to how completely interconnected we are. And that is astounding, and in a certain way really beautiful. Like, there are beautiful things coming out of it, and that's one of the ways I personally have learned to cope with the uncertainty, is look for the, as Mr. Rogers said, right? Look for the helpers, look for the supporters, seeing little acts of generosity and kindness and care, and tuning my mind to that have been one of the most important ways for me to deal with uncertainty, is to know that there are people who care, and there always will be people who care, and that I can be one of those people who care, right? And I can do that within my family, but also beyond. The other big way is by focusing on the natural world, by getting outside every day and taking some time to notice, like, this tree that I'm looking at out here, a crepe myrtle tree, even just a few days ago didn't have any leaves on it, and now it has leaves. And so uncertainty has only one certainty, and that is that this too shall change.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I was walking too in the neighborhood, someone, like some little community angel, chalked that on the ground. This too shall pass. And just seeing that message and noticing that message, knowing that we're in this, and that how we respond, how I respond right now, is important. It's all that matters. But also, we'll be in a different situation in a year and in 5 years. Even if the other part for me, and this is getting into something I want to ask you about, Neelam, is I had to have my come to mortality moment of looking at my own death and looking at face to face the death of people that I love. The truth is, right, in our Buddhist practice, and also in yoga too, it's like Yama, the god of death, is like a companion, and it's a companion that you talk to and you can glean wisdom from. But that's all great in theory, and when I'm reading, the Yoga Sutras or some Buddhist practice, and even in meditation, contemplating my own death, it's very different than being presented with sobering statistics and the possibility that many of the elders, or just any, randomly folks who I love, may succumb to this disease that we are trying desperately to protect each other and ourselves from. But we don't ultimately have control. And so that coming face to face, something again we all share, but that I often try to avoid looking at, or I live my life in a degree of denial, let's just be real, of some of that reality. I had to come face to face and say, well, look, if I just get one more year, or even 6 months, like I'm going to do what I can in this time with the people that I can impact to be my very best self, and to really love up and be there and be really present on the Zoom calls instead of multitasking, or when I'm listening to someone in my ear, on a podcast or a course or class, like really soak it up and suck it up. So I think that those are some of the ways I've been coping with uncertainty right now. There's some less healthy ways, like eating more chocolate.
Of course, of course. We all have the distractions we want to do. There's so many like juicy morsels from what you were saying. One thing that stood out for me is that chalk that you were saying that, you found on the sidewalk. I could be doing that. We could all just be on our driveways, just reminding each other as we walk past, like this too shall pass, like change is constant. As is uncertainty, change is constant. Noticing that and helping to understand like the natural world is growing and is actually in some ways thriving because humans have stopped doing some of our more noxious activities. And I say that also knowing that so much of our noxious activities come from corporations and not individual actions. And so it's not like the solution is then we all have to work from home, but there is like this like dolphins that are now in the Venice canals in Italy, and fish in places that were never fished. And you can see from satellite images all the pollution that has left China. Like there is this way that pressing a collective pause has allowed for some growth in the natural world that maybe wasn't there before.
And I think you can say that. I just want to point this out because one of the things we deal with in the yoga world is a lot of toxic positivity and spiritual bypassing. And so I just want to point out, like, as a frontline healthcare worker who is alongside your colleagues going to be risking your lives to save other lives, as many lives as possible, that's some perspective. I want to just kind of note that, because I think sometimes when people bring up all those things, but people are dying, right? And on a big picture level, I do hope we try to find those silver linings, or the choice that in the future, when things are different and the healthcare threat is maintained or contained, that we're like, oh right, we can reset our behaviors to care more for the earth. It didn't take that long for these changes to happen. But at the same time, I'm curious about that, right? On a facing uncertainty level, when we go into denial, or we go into like, oh, I'm only going to have positive things here in an attempt to not try to bring people down, or whatever it is. Like, how do we balance that? I'm really curious. And I also think it's helpful to hear from you as a physician.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree that some of what makes us, and I'm going to say weak, but I'm going to say this in air quotes because obviously there's so much strength in our communities and so much resilience. But some of the ways, particularly people in the US, have been able to deal in the world has been through consumption and distraction. When we can no longer do those things, we have to sit with ourselves and sit with the emotions that come. And we have been coddled to a certain extent, and I don't think this is true for all races and all classes. Middle class Americans, like, we've never had to experience famine in the same kind of way as other countries, or war or genocide, not in our lifetimes. This is something that's really, really different. And so to have anxiety and to have fear and all of that makes a lot of sense. I guess my invitation would be to experience those feelings and really experience them instead of trying to tune out with distractions or other things, to really experience them in the fullness of their being, thereby giving you a chance to then open your heart to other feelings as well.
Mm.
If you're in denial about what you're feeling, you're going to be in denial about what you're feeling all the time, including the joy and the positivity. But if you can really feel, I believe, if I can really feel the sadness and the grief and the anxiety and the worry and the dread and the fear, just the fear of what it might mean for me, I can also leave room to feel the joy, to feel the peace, even to feel the connection. And there's so much of that happening right now too. That's how I deal with it. It's like, okay, let's feel it all. Let's welcome it all in, and let's be present and sit with all of it. And I don't want to pretend like that's all I do. Like, there's definitely moments of distraction. There is a lot of Netflix happening in this household. There's a lot of like chocolate covered almonds happening. So it cycles. But if I can have moments, just moments, in my yoga practice or in my meditation practice or in a conversation with a friend, of really, really experiencing the feelings, all the feelings, then I'm open to new ones.
Mm. Thank you. Yeah, that's so helpful. And it's just a reminder that emotions, they're just sensation, right? They're composed of sensation in the body. And so by being present in that way, we give ourselves, it's that too is a kind of yoga practice, or a kind of practice of centering, a kind of practice of being there with what is. We can all practice that, whether we can walk, sit, stand, lie down, we can all be present in that way. So can you share with us some other, I know you're in your practice, your telehealth now, or your telemedicine that you're doing, you get asked these questions all the time, like, how do I deal with the anxiety, with the stress that comes from this uncertainty? What are the things that you're telling your patients? And what I really want to know is what's working for your patients? What have you seen be actually effective? And just, again, want to say again how grateful I am that there are healthcare workers like you who care about their patients' mental health, emotional health, and that understand that it's a whole picture, right? That we're treating a whole human being, because that often is said to be the purview of alternative medicine like Ayurveda or other things, and it is. But I think one of the shifts we're seeing is that, a family medicine doctor also actually has to perform the function now of a supporter or a friend or a wise counselor, or even a therapist, right? It's like you're getting all of it.
Oh, yeah, most definitely. Before I answer that, I also want to say that I think that the more that we make room for our emotions, we can make room for other people's emotions. So it's been so important for me to actually sit with my own, because otherwise, if I'm on the phone with someone who's very, very anxious, the way that manifests is not someone saying, "I'm very anxious, doc." What they say is, "What do you mean I can't get that test?" And I understand, in a perfect world, maybe even not so perfect world, but in a world that's more prepared for a pandemic, we would have had testing, universal testing, more than once, we would continually being tested. So I get why people are frustrated. When we have a lack of leadership, it boils down to our cellular level.
Mm.
We can feel the disunity in the country, in ourselves, when we have someone who's flip-flopping and saying different messages every single day. We feel that torn feeling inside of ourselves too. And then there's this like sense of scarce resources or hoarding or competition between each other, between states, between people, with toilet paper or whatever it is, that has kept us from really connecting with each other. And that I think is the hardest thing about this moment, because that's what we really need right now. All
Mm.
that anxiety and fear, the antidote is connection and belonging.
It so is. And I just want to underline and highlight what you just said, Neelam, which is when when we take the time to really be present and feel our feelings, like we were just sharing about, that in part is what enables us to do it for others. And it's that is the magic key that to the connection that we also desperately need, that will help us in this time of really, like, we're scared, we're scared and we want our comfort, whoever our comfort is, whatever our comfort is, we want that comfort. And yet it may not be there. And so each of us, in the tradition, talk about a bodhisattva. And I just want to share this quickly, and because I know you have more to share, but a bodhisattva is a sentient being who arises to take care for the suffering in the world. And bodhisattvas aren't necessarily there all the time, but when the need arises, they arise. And so if we're in the presence of someone who is suffering, anyone can become that bodhisattva, can become that helper, that support person, that carer, that mother figure or loving parental figure, nurturer, grandparent, whatever image works for you. But you can be that in that moment of that being arising in need. So I love that image and that.
Totally. And I love that. And sometimes we have to be a bodhisattva for ourselves. And that's just real. We really have to turn in a lack of leadership, a lack of governance, and a lack of comfort from other people taking care of us. We are left to take care of ourselves. And so I do understand that feeling of like, you're asking me to take care of other people. I can't even take care of myself. Mm-hmm. I want that comfort and I want that warmth and feeling. And so sometimes we have to do that for ourselves. We have to allow ourselves to feel it all in a safe way. We have to find the people that we can do that with. One of the things that I tell my patients that I think is working is some of what you shared earlier, which is to be out in the natural world, to take walks, to move your body. So much of how animals deal with fear and anxiety is to move. And yet we often, a lot of us have we've been sitting so much, right? In general, and now shelter at home, we're sitting even more. So moving, I've been so excited about the dance parties that are happening online, and just the ability to just move at home and experience a connection with people around the world. Like, that is actually a really special and unique thing about this moment. And so people have shared with me that dancing and being outside 6 feet away from one another with a mask, like, these are all things that are super important. Feeling the sun, even if you live in a place where it's cold right now, like looking outside the window, just noticing the things that you wouldn't have noticed before. Spending time with our families and our kids in a different way, and just really experiencing their joy. I'm lucky enough to have small kids, and I say lucky also in quotes because it's a lot of work. I'm not writing the next American novel here. I'm actually going to work and doing more work than I've ever had at home with these like 2 small toddlers. But they are showing me how amazing a ladybug is. Mm-hmm. And just so really experiencing the world through their eyes. The other thing that people have said that has been helpful, and what I suggest besides movement, is to really figure out what you're grateful for. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean to bypass all the other emotions, but to really remember that we do have so much. And if we can remember that, even in moments of suffering and fear and anxiety, we can temper that. We can temper that by remembering our families, remembering the love that we have, remembering the home that we live in. Some of us don't have homes right now. Some of us don't have food right now. Some of us don't have safety in our homes right now. So being grateful for that will also allow us to reach out to those who don't, just like we're talking about. And then some other things, play, I think, is hugely important. So in whatever way that comes for you, doing something that's playful, making meaning of this moment. A lot of people have been figuring out how to do that on their own, and they'll share with me their meanings, which is really fascinating to hear. This doesn't work for everyone. Some people, it doesn't work at all. There's no meaning in this. I get it. Like, feel all the rage, feel that. But some people it really works for, to say, okay, well, even this is happening for a reason. Let me figure out what that reason is for me. And maybe that's a time to pause, and maybe it's a time to reorganize your closets, Or maybe it's a time to really connect with your neighbors in a way that you've never done before. So that's really important. And then the other thing I would say is touch.
Mm.
You know, it's really like making sure that you are being touched and touching other people in your family. And I know we can't touch our strangers or our friends that we're not sharing germs with, but we can within our families.
Mm.
So if you're sharing germs with your family and you feel comfortable, making sure that you get a hug every now and then. And if you're not, if you're alone, making sure you give yourself a hug, you know, and really like the self massage, the abhyanga, the really sort of way that you treasure and cherish your body. I think it matters. I think it matters that we're touched right now.
It really does. And I've noticed that a lot with my kiddo. We also have a pet. We have a dog named Harmony, sweet Labradoodle rescue pup. And I've really been taking the time to stop and recognize her and then connect and cuddle her or rub her. And it always makes me feel so much better when I do that. And then with my kiddo, like wrestling and playing and just really finding a way to have that contact. Now, also, I want to just elaborate on Abhyanga because Neelam, you mentioned it, which Abhyanga comes from Ayurveda, and it's a practice of self-massage. And you can do it dry, like with nothing on your hands, or you can take lotion, or Ayurvedically, you want to use oil, like coconut oil or olive oil, some kind of a natural oil. And you do long strokes on your arm or your legs, on your whole body, rubbing it in, and then circles on the joints, like on the elbows or on the wrists. And it is very grounding and calming for the nervous system. And I think these types of practices, like a self massage, when I do it, I also say thank you. Like, thank you, arms, for everything you let me do, type, hug, connect with, cook today. Thank you, legs, for carrying me throughout the neighborhood on the walks, those types of things. I thank my body as I'm doing it. And it is very grounding. In the face of uncertainty, you know, there are some things that, again, they are certain in this moment. As long as we're alive, we're breathing. And so coming back to our own body, placing a hand on the heart, feeling the heartbeat or feeling the chest as you inhale, expanding. And as you exhale, feel it settle down and drop towards the earth. And allowing the natural rhythm, that music of our lives, that is the backdrop to our lives, our breath, our heartbeat, our digestion, to really be a source of sustenance and a source of assurance in an uncertain world right now.
One thing that it made me think of is that so much of what we're consuming right now is actually harmful for us. You know, I think some of our tendencies is to get the most information possible, but that might not be what's nourishing for us. And I'm not suggesting that we just not, you know, ever go on the news, but really like having boundaries around when the news is on, when we check social media, and really asking ourselves these questions of like, do I feel more grounded, more centered? Do I feel more embodied in my body, more able to take on the next challenge? Or do I feel less of those things after I consume this?
Yeah.
Really being like really noticing that and really taking care of the things that come our way and what we're consuming. And just like acknowledging that also what we're consuming is a worldwide panic. It
Mm-hmm.
is not just ours. It is everybody's, and it's a collective panic. And we feel it. We feel it cellularly. We feel it in our hearts and our bodies. And it's going to impact us. So really having a practice like what you're saying, also releasing some of that, which is not ours, letting go. And so some of it is just like shaking, letting our hands just move, right? The movement, this is where that comes in, but really kind of being mindful and asking and inviting ourselves to just let go of what is not ours to hold right now. Like,
Can I share the way I've been doing it? Because my very first reaction when COVID came up and I started to see cases in the early part of 2020 was to seek information. A lot of times anxiety seeks information, and that is good because I was informed, but then really what was happening is I was scared. And
mhm.
scared seeks connection, like you just shared with us. And so really I needed connection, but I was seeking information and feeding my fear. And that's not so helpful. And so what I've now done is decide every day, if I choose to look at the news, I ask myself, when am I going to schedule my anxiety? When am I going to schedule it? Because there's no doubt that looking at the news right now is going to be anxiety producing on so many levels, and heartbreaking, and so just desperately sad. And yes, there may be information that I need, but at the same time, I need to then prepare myself to handle that, integrate that in some way in my heart, mind, body, spirit. And so when I schedule it, I'm actually much more like, okay, I'm going to do that now, and then I'm going to go for a run, or then I'm going to go have a dance party, or then I'm going to go play whatever with my kiddo in order to move it out and through my system. And I have, since that switching of my mindset, is not I'm going to get information. No, it's when am I scheduling my anxiety. I've actually been on the news a lot less, and I have felt a lot more able to cope. I mean, as much as you can cope with something so uncertain.
Oh, that's so good. I'm going to use that,
Yeah,
is schedule my anxiety. It's so true because we're consuming that, and it's information, but it's a collective fear that we're consuming as well. It's watering the seeds of all of our fear and anxiety. And so we do have to do something about it. And so it makes so much sense that if, like, we want to stay informed, yes, but we need to figure out what to do afterwards so that we can feel grounded and centered again.
we are in this together. And we often think of anxiety and uncertainty as a very individualized and personal thing. But more than ever, that type of thinking isn't what's going to actually help us overcome this as a global community. My son, when we were on that walk, the same one with the beautiful, inspiring words, he's like, there's nowhere in this universe, in this world, safe from the virus, is there? And I was like, I don't think there is. And he said, well, if there was another universe, we could go there. It's like, yeah, that might be a solution. Maybe you'll help find that solution. He's like, but they might have it too, and it might be worse. It was ah, like that kind of thinking. First of all, that level of problem solving, but also that level of like deep understanding of how it's like the astronaut from space looking down on Earth. Like this is not something anyone, no money, no power, nothing conveys immunity except for the community, right? Like the only thing that can do it is all of us. And so I think we're actually entering this time of more and more that way of thinking community wide, and like social solidarity is going to be the solution. And so I just want to take some time to explore that.
Oh my God, you said it right so perfectly. Community is immunity. That's so beautiful. And I think you're absolutely right. It's just a matter of how we do that while social distancing and being safe. I mean, that's the $1 million question right now, is what is our collective response
Mm.
to what is being uncovered in this moment? And we're moving to like power structures and the things that are impacting us. And what we're realizing is that our healthcare system, and so many of us have known this so long, but our public health system is in shambles. Our healthcare system is completely disorganized and leaves a lot of people out of basic healthcare needs that they are so desperate for right now. The amount of basically capitalism has not served us well. There is a lot of personal protective equipment everywhere, and it is going to the highest bidder instead of who needs it most.
Mm.
I mean, there's so many examples of things that are being uncovered right now. And then there's examples of people organizing in this moment for decarceration, for instance, of getting people out of jails because that is a completely unsafe environment for people. Some people are there on bail, like because they couldn't post bail. That's
Mm.
not a humane response to someone not having enough money is for them to be locked in a cell with someone and not be able to be social distanced from them, and therefore be vulnerable to the virus. I mean, I think that there's just a lot being uncovered about the haves and the have-nots. I just read an article that said there's many rich people who are chartering yachts and just riding out COVID in the middle of the ocean. Just,
Really?
yes. So
Oh,
while the virus does not discriminate, there is different access to resources and healthcare and testing and everything on down, ventilators, everything. So
that's
it's
so true, right? And the global south and the global north, this is something that it's like right now, the majority of the cases, at least at time of us recording this, are in more developed nations. And yet IMF and a number of other major institutions are saying like this is going to be absolutely devastating for nations and countries and states that have historically had so much less. And so it's true. It's like our privilege will still perhaps give us some better access to care and containment. And folks who can't afford not to go to work, who work in a store, or they don't have the same access to the privilege to social distance. And so I think part of the solidarity for me is like, well, what can I, from my house where I am practicing social distancing, teaching online, offering, showing up, right? Teaching people, continuing to be present virtually. But what can I do, say, to my local representatives around, decarcerating nonviolent folks who are in jail for nonviolent reasons? There's still things we can do to think on a community level to build that community immunity.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. And so some of that, you'll find on social media. So that's a really good use of social media, is to figure out how people are organizing in response to this and protecting people who are the most vulnerable from this moment. And also really standing in solidarity with physicians around the world and healthcare workers, not just physicians, but all the healthcare workers that are putting themselves on the front lines and potentially in a very dicey situation for the good of everyone. I've been on so many Facebook physician groups, and I really do think that there's nobody knows. It's like, what do we do except respond in the moment to what is the crisis in the moment, and hope and pray that we learn from this, and that we, out of this, we construct something that is better.
What do you need as a physician, right? What do you need, and how can we who are not in that direct frontline position, how can we be of support?
I definitely think talking to, like, writing letters to Congress, to people in power, to making sure that, that your voice is heard, to getting involved with people who are decarcerating, making masks and passing them around to people, to donating to mutual aid funds to help people who've lost their jobs or are unable to afford rent or things like that. If you can do that. Pay your gardeners, pay your house cleaners. They deserve sick time too. So please make sure that anyone who is, if you have the ability to do this, because I know a lot of people have lost their jobs and income, and so they can't, but if you can, please do. Check in on the people who are vulnerable. If you know people are in like a domestic violence situation or an abuse situation, check in on them, even if it's just knocking on their door and leaving something for them, a note, some cookies. Stay 6 feet away from them and say, hey, I just wanted to see how you're doing. Check in on the elderly in your community, the people who are most vulnerable to serious disease. For healthcare workers, I personally love when people check in on me and just send me a note that says, hey, thank you for what you're doing. I'm with you. Every time you go out there, I'm with you. And it's just super helpful to know that people are appreciative. So that really goes a long way. And of course, like, everybody needs a meal. Everybody needs a snack. So leaving that on someone's doorstep. If you have an avocado tree, pass out your avocados to the neighborhood. Just like little acts of generosity, I think, can build community and build a sense of belonging and togetherness in a time when disunity reigns so rampant, and competition for scarce resources is like the mantra in people's minds. It's like we can actually make a different world just by small acts of generosity and kindness. And I'm not saying that that's going to topple systems of power. I'm saying that it's helpful for those people who are most vulnerable.
Those, out of all those things that you listed, I'm sure for folks listening, we can each pick at least some that we can do. We don't have to do it all, but we can do a few things that, or others, and we'll share more in our resources.
For sure. I just wanted to ask you if you wanted to highlight some of the practices or offer a practice, as we sort of wind down this conversation, things people can take away from this session, from this moment, things that we've talked about that have really struck you.
So in the yogic tradition, a lot of, and in the mindfulness and Buddhist traditions too, a lot of what we are doing is intentionally bringing our awareness to face uncertainty. So we're in it's kind of like we're swimming upstream, right? Like I remember being on this silent meditation retreat, and this teacher looked around at all of us. We had all gathered, about 50 people in a room, and a dark room, pretty dark. Outside was sunny, beautiful California day. And she said, "What are you doing here? Why are you here? Why did you choose to come and sit in silence for the whole day? All the things you could have been doing today." And I'll never forget that moment, because it's counterintuitive. And yet now we're all being asked to do things that are completely counterintuitive, to distance ourselves, to not go to work, we're being asked to run up against stream, and for what feels natural and feels normal. And yet in that silent retreat day, I had some of the most profound experiences of deep understanding of myself and why I would make a choice like that. Because by shutting things down, by just sitting and focusing on my breath and being present, I was really able to see what really mattered to me. And so I think that those teachings of these wisdom traditions are here for us. And whether or not you're a person of faith, or you're a person who believes in God or higher power or science or the universe, it doesn't really matter what the vehicle is for your personal choice of transformation, but we are being called to that now, right? To whether it's a conversation with our own death, or sitting in silence for a few minutes at some point each day, or writing in our journals. I don't think it's going to look the same for all of us, but I do think that a time like this, that level of uncertainty that we're facing, invites in ritual of presence.
One of my big takeaways is that we all need to be in a level of acceptance about what is happening. And when we allow ourselves to accept this moment as it fully is, we also allow all of the emotions that might arise to be there, including joy and gratitude, in the midst of all of the fear and anxiety. Given that, we wanted to close with a practice that we wanted to offer for you, and Susanna's going to do that right now.
So I invite everyone, wherever you are, to inhale and stretch your arms up over your head, wide like a V. And then on your exhale, cross one arm on top of the other and wrap your arms around yourself, walking your fingers back around your shoulders. Give yourself a big hug, thinking of something you love and appreciate about yourself. Kind and generous. And then inhale the arms back up wide, and another V. Exhale and wrap them, the other arm on top. One more big hug. Grateful for yourself. And then you can let your arms come down.
I do not need to wait in order to enjoy my life. This is not an interruption of my life. This is my life. My life is not going to suddenly go back to normal. This is a new normal. I accept this moment, all of what it brings to me, the good, the bad, the fear, the hurt, the grief. I accept it. I bring it inside. I hold it close. I love every being, every ounce, every cell of our collective being. Thank you for joining us today.
We hope this has nourished some of your radical resilience. Thank you.